The first crack of gunfire shattered the morning silence, echoing across the canyon walls like a jagged scream, and Mariah Jensen froze, her hand clutching the reins of her chestnut moray starfire. The river at her feet glimmered faintly in the pre-dawn light, its cold current rushing over rounded stones and carrying the scent of damp earth and sage. Her heart hammered so violently she could almost hear it in the wind. Mariah had been traveling alone for days, the sun rising and falling over desolate mesas and endless plains. Her mind preoccupied with the homestead she had left behind and the husband she barely recognized anymore. She wasn't an ordinary frontier woman. At 30, her face had the faint lines of experience and survival, her green eyes sharp with observation, and her hands, though soft from careful work, were steady and strong. She had learned to move quietly, speak softly, and trust her instincts. Yet the sound of a gunshot, so close, made her nerves jangle in ways she wasn't accustomed to. Across the shallow river, shrouded in early mist, a figure emerged. Tall and broad-shouldered, his silhouette was striking against the pale glow of dawn. His long black hair tumbled past his shoulders, adorned with small beads and feathers that glinted faintly in the light. A long, dust-streaked coat flapped slightly in the breeze, and the glint of metal arrowheads or knives Mariah couldn't tell hung from his neck. His stance was deliberate, calm, yet every movement radiated a lethal grace. "You shouldn't be out here alone," the man called. His voice low, almost a whisper carried on the wind. Mariah's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay still. She had seen Apache scouts before, but this man, there was something different about him. His eyes were dark, unreadable, like polished obsidian, and they seemed to pierce straight into her thoughts. She reached slowly for the revolver strapped to her hip, her fingers brushing the cold metal. "I'm just passing through," she said, her voice measured. "I mean no trouble." The man smiled faintly, the kind of smile that was more a shadow than a promise. "Passing through?" he repeated, stepping closer, his boots stirring dust and river silt. "You're far from anyone who could protect you." Her hand twitched over her revolver, ready to draw, but before she could react further, another voice shattered the fragile tension. "Mariah! What's going on there?" Thomas Jensen, her husband, appeared at the edge of the riverbank, the sunlight glinting off his rugged face. He was stocky, a man whose bulk suggested strength, but whose eyes often betrayed hesitation. Fear and suspicion flashed across his features as he stared at the mysterious figure approaching. The Apache didn't seem to acknowledge Thomas directly. Instead, he reached into a leather pouch and tossed it at the man's feet. 20 silver dollars spilled into the sand, clinking against the rocks in a harsh, metallic rhythm. Thomas bent down instinctively, unsure whether to pick them up or fling them back. I don't understand," Thomas muttered, his voice wavering between fear and outrage. The Apache's gaze shifted slowly to Mariah, intense and unwavering. "You are mine," he whispered, so quietly that only she could hear, yet the words seemed to echo inside her chest. There was a command in the way he spoke, a pull she could not resist, and a danger that made her stomach twist. Mariah's mind raced. There was a story here, one she could not yet read, hidden beneath the calm, unyielding exterior of this man. Her instincts screamed that he was no ordinary wanderer or scout. He moved with a predator's confidence, yet there was restraint, as if he knew he could overwhelm them both but chose not to. The man turned, mounting his horse with a fluidity that left Mariah breathless. Without another word, he rode toward the horizon, the rising sun turning his silhouette into something both ethereal and terrifying. Dust swirled in his wake, clinging to the riverbank like a warning etched into the landscape. Thomas stared after him, pale and trembling. Who was that?" Mariah shook her head, a mix of confusion and dread tightening her chest. I don't know, she said. But he's not finished with us. I can feel it. For a long moment, they both stood silently by the river, the $20 lying between them like a dark omen, glinting faintly in the early light. The wind carried the scent of wet sage and cold water, and Mariah felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the morning chill. She turned her gaze to the river, watching it rush by with relentless determination. The water had no loyalty, no fear, it simply flowed, cutting paths through rock and soil as though it owned the valley. She thought of the man on horseback, riding with purpose, and wondered what currents of fate had led him to her life. Thomas finally spoke, his voice low and unsure. Mariah, should we report this? Tell someone? She shook her head. No one can help us with him. He doesn't belong to this land, not really. He's something else. We have to be ready for whatever comes next. Her heart pounded, not just from fear, but from a strange, unnameable anticipation. She couldn't deny it. The pull she felt toward the man was magnetic, as though he had touched some part of her soul she had kept, locked away for years. The remainder of the morning passed in tense silence. Thomas kept glancing over his shoulder as he gathered the remaining coins, muttering about fairness and morality, while Mariah's thoughts remained with the man who had vanished like a shadow across the desert. She noticed the way the light played along the river, turning ordinary stones into something glittering and dangerous, a reflection of the tension she felt inside. By midday, they had crossed the river and resumed their journey westward, the mountains rising in the distance like silent sentinels. Every rustle of brush, every bird call, every crack of a branch under hoof felt loaded with meaning, a possible signal of the man's return. Mariah's senses were alert, her hand never far from her revolver, though her mind often wandered to the cryptic whisper that had settled like a seed in her chest. You are mine. That night, they camped at the edge of a small mesa. The fire cast long shadows across Mariah's face, highlighting the lines of thought and worry. She stirred the embers with a stick, watching sparks spiral into the sky, imagining them as fragments of a story she couldn't yet fully understand. Thomas tried to break the silence. He paid you with $20. Do you think he's some kind of mercenary? Or a trickster? Mariah shook her head, staring into the flames. No, he wasn't trying to buy me. Not really. There was something else there, something I don't understand yet. And I think I don't want to. Thomas frowned, uneasy. Don't tell me you're thinking about him. I'm thinking about survival, Mariah corrected sharply, then softened. And about understanding why he appeared. There's more to this than just a stranger passing through. I can feel it. The wind rose, tugging at the tent flaps and carrying the scent of distant rain and wet earth. Somewhere beyond the hills, the river murmured its relentless song. Mariah lay awake long into the night, the stars scattered across the velvet sky, thinking about the man who had declared, softly but with deadly certainty, that she was his. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't know why. But she knew her life had shifted irrevocably in the space of a single morning. And somewhere deep in her chest, beneath fear and anger, there was a spark of curiosity, a dangerous, exhilarating spark that refused to die. By the time the first light of dawn touched the mesa, Mariah had made a silent vow. She would find out who he was, what he wanted, and why he had marked her life so indelibly. And she would be ready for him, whatever the cost. The river below continued to rush, carrying its secrets downstream. And somewhere beyond the hills, a man on horseback rode into the sun, his eyes set firmly on her, waiting for the moment their paths would cross again. The sun had barely risen over the jagged cliffs of Raven's Pass when Mariah Jensen tightened her grip on Starfire's reins. The canyon stretched before her like a jagged scar in the earth, the walls rising so high that the morning light barely reached the rocky floor below. The air was dry and heavy with dust, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and the sharp tang of minerals in the soil. Mariah's thoughts drifted back to the morning by the river, to the words Taha had whispered, "You are mine." The memory sent a shiver down her spine, part fear, part something more unsettling, something she dared not name. Starfire snorted nervously, sensing her tension, and Mariah patted the mare's neck. Grounding herself, Thomas rode beside her, his expression tight with unease. "I don't like this place," he muttered, his voice low. "It feels wrong." Mariah didn't respond immediately. She could feel it too, the unnatural silence that settled over the pass, broken only by the occasional rattle of loose stones tumbling down the cliffs. The canyon had a reputation for ambushes, and she had no doubt why. The jagged terrain created perfect hiding spots for outlaws or worse. "Keep your eyes open," she finally said, her voice calm but firm. "We're not alone here, Thomas." "I can feel it," he grunted, his hand resting uneasily near the grip of his revolver. They had been traveling together for 2 days, trying to keep a safe distance from Taha, yet the pull he had over her remained inescapable. She tried to push the thought aside, focusing instead on the rocky trail, which wound precariously along the edge of the canyon dot as they rounded a sharp bend. A sudden sound stopped them in their tracks, the thunder of hooves echoing against stone. Out of a swirl of dust and sand, a figure emerged. Taha. He rode alone, but his presence was commanding, almost magnetic. His coat flapped in the wind, the tribal jewelry around his neck catching the sunlight, and his long black hair streamed behind him like a dark banner. Mariah's heart leapt. "Taha," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Thomas stiffened, anger and fear mingling on his face. "Stay back, Mariah. Don't go near him." Taha slowed his horse to a deliberate, steady pace. His eyes locked on Mariah's, unblinking and intense. He dismounted smoothly, boots crunching against the rocky canyon floor, and stepped closer. Every movement was measured, calm, and deadly in its precision. "You shouldn't have come through here," he said, his voice low and resonant, carrying easily in the canyon. "It's dangerous for you." Mariah felt an involuntary shiver. "I'm not a child," she said, her voice steady despite the tension curling in her stomach. Taha's dark eyes softened, just slightly, but his presence remained overwhelming. "I know," he replied, "but danger has a way of finding those who think themselves untouchable." Thomas stepped forward, his fists clenched. "She's my wife, Taha. I won't let you." Mariah placed a hand on Thomas's chest, halting him. "Don't," she said sharply. Her green eyes met Taha's, searching, questioning, trying to understand him and the hold he seemed to have over her own life. Taha's gaze lingered on her a moment longer. "Your money does not make her yours," he said quietly. "She belongs to no one but herself." The canyon was silent for a heartbeat, except for the rush of wind through the rocks. And then came the sound, the click and roar of rifles cocking from hidden positions along the canyon walls. Outlaws. Mariah's pulse jumped. The air seemed to tighten around them, the shadows of the rocks hiding a dozen enemies. "Run!" Thomas shouted, but Mariah knew better. There was no running from this place. The cliffs and narrow paths would trap them. She drew her revolver instinctively, her hand steady despite the surge of adrenaline. Taha's eyes narrowed, and in a flash he drew a long knife from his belt. The movement was fluid, practiced, and terrifyingly fast. In the span of a heartbeat, he had disabled the first outlaw who stepped too close, knocking him unconscious with the flat of his blade. Another man lunged from behind a boulder, and Taha spun, deflecting the attack and sending the man sprawling into the dirt. Mariah's mind raced. She had expected danger, but nothing like this. Taha moved with a controlled fury, protecting her without hesitation, every motion precise, almost predatory. Yet he never threatened Thomas, never acted recklessly. He was calculated, deadly, yet in control of the chaos. Bullets tore into the canyon walls, sending dust and small rocks raining down. Thomas ducked behind a boulder, trembling, while Mariah's eyes never left Taha. There was a strange mixture of fear and awe in her chest. This man, so fierce, so untamed, was somehow on her side. When the last of the outlaws fled into the shadows, Taha wiped his knife clean on his coat and looked at Mariah. His chest heaved, but his eyes remained calm, piercing. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Mariah shook her head, lowering her revolver. "No," she said, her voice soft. "Thanks to you." He gave a single, curt nod, then turned his attention to Thomas. "You should reconsider what you think you own," he said, voice low but firm. "Fear and money are not the same as control." Thomas paled, his mouth opening and closing without words. He stared at Taha as if seeing him for the first time, and perhaps, in some sense, he was. Mariah stepped forward, standing tall between the two men. "We need to move," she said, her voice steady. "The canyon is no place to linger, and others may follow." Taha nodded. "You are wise," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "I will be watching. Not to control, but to ensure your path is safe. You are not as alone as you believe." With that, he mounted his horse again, the long black hair and dust-streaked coat trailing like a shadow. He rode off slowly, but every movement was deliberate, as though the wind itself followed him. Mariah and Thomas watched him disappear into the canyon, the tension lingering like smoke after a fire. Thomas finally exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. Who is he really?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Mariah's gaze followed the fading dust trail. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I know one thing: he's not done with us. And I don't want him to be." That night, they made camp near a rocky outcrop overlooking the canyon floor. Mariah lit a small fire, the flames casting flickering shadows across her face. She watched the stars, scattered across the sky like shards of glass, thinking about Taha, the man who had declared her free yet marked her as his own in some unspoken way. Thomas sat nearby, poking at the fire with a stick, his expression a mix of anger, fear, and confusion. "I don't understand," he said finally. He could have taken you by force if he wanted. Why didn't he?" Mariah's green eyes, reflective and piercing in the firelight, met his. "Because he's not like anyone we've met. He respects strength, Thomas. He respects choice. And he's different." Thomas shook his head, frustration and helplessness etched into his features. "I don't like this. I don't like him." Mariah reached out, placing a firm hand on his arm. "You don't have to. But I do. And whatever he is, he's a part of my life now, whether you like it or not." The wind picked up, rustling the dry sagebrush and sending dust swirling through the camp. The night was alive with sounds, distant cries of coyotes, the whisper of wind through rocks, and the ever-present rush of the river far below the canyon. Mariah lay awake long after Thomas had drifted into uneasy sleep, thinking about Taha, about the river crossing, about the canyon ambush, and about the strange pull that he had over her. By dawn, she made a silent vow. She would not ignore him. She would not run from the destiny that seemed to ripple outward from the man with the long black hair and tribal jewelry. The river, the canyon, the ambush, it was all leading her somewhere she could not yet understand. And she knew, deep in her chest, that Taha was waiting for her again. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, he was riding toward her, and their fates were entwined in ways she could neither predict nor resist. The desert sun had barely begun its climb when Mariah Jensen rode along a narrow trail winding through a dense stand of mesquite trees. The air was sharp with the scent of dry earth, crushed sage, and the faint sweetness of desert blooms. Her chestnut Mara Starfire moved with deliberate caution, hooves crunching against loose stones. Every rustle in the underbrush made her tense, her hand hovering near her revolver. The events of Raven's Pass haunted her still. Taha, the Apache with long black hair, tribal jewelry, and a presence that was impossible to ignore, had saved her life without a word of claim or insult to her freedom. Yet the memory of his whisper, "You are mine," lingered like a shadow she could not shake. Thomas trailed behind her, struggling to keep up with the rough terrain. His rugged face was pale under the relentless sun, his hands gripping his reins tightly. He had been silent since the canyon encounter, his pride bruised and his mind restless with confusion and jealousy. "This is the last stretch before the homestead," he muttered, his voice tight. "You shouldn't have wandered off. You don't know what's out here." Mariah shook her head, eyes scanning the surrounding mesquite trees. "I know exactly what's out here," she replied softly. "And I'm not wandering. I'm searching for answers. For him." Thomas frowned, frustration etched into the lines of his face. "For him? The Apache? Mariah, he's dangerous. You don't even know his intentions. Why are you drawn to him?" Mariah didn't answer immediately. Her mind was occupied by the memory of the canyon ambush, the way Taha moved like a shadow, controlled and precise, protecting her even when Thomas had faltered. Something about him unsettled her. Yes, but more than that, it fascinated her. There was a quiet strength, a force of nature that demanded respect, and a depth in his dark eyes that stirred feelings she could not yet name. A sudden movement caught her attention. From between two large mesquite trunks, a shadow emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, silent. Taha. He approached slowly, boots barely making a sound on the sandy earth. His long coat fluttered lightly in the morning breeze, the beads and feathers on his chest catching the sun like fragments of fire. His dark eyes, sharp and unreadable, fixed on her with an intensity that made her chest ache. "You came," he said simply, almost a statement rather than a question. Mariah dismounted, her heart hammering. "I had to. I need to understand why you keep appearing, why you're in my life," she said, her voice firm but tinged with vulnerability. Taha's expression softened ever so slightly, though his eyes remained sharp. "I do not appear to haunt," he said. "I appear to protect and to guide. That is all." Thomas's voice, rough and fearful, cut through the tension. "Mariah, get back on your horse. Now, don't listen to him." Mariah turned to her husband, her green eyes blazing. "Thomas, stop," she shouted. "I am not afraid of him. And I am not afraid of myself. This, whatever this is, I need to see it through." Taha stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "You seek truth. You seek freedom. Both are dangerous in this land. But you are strong enough to face them." Mariah swallowed hard. "And you? Why do you care about me? Why follow me?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he sank to a crouch near a small fire he had built, picking up a stone to sharpen a long knife with deliberate care. Sparks flew as the blade kissed the stone, tiny reflections of light dancing across his angular features. "Because some debts cannot be measured in silver," he said finally, voice low. "Some bonds are older than men, older than the land. You are part of one such bond." Mariah's heart skipped. She didn't fully understand, but something inside her recognized the truth in his words. A bond older than choice, older than reason, a thread pulling her toward him, weaving her fate with Taha's in ways she could not yet see. Suddenly, a rustle in the mesquite caught their attention. Mariah instinctively reached for her revolver, her senses heightened. From the shadows emerged a group of settlers, startled by the sight of the Apache. Their rifles were raised instinctively, but fear tempered their aim. Taha's movements were fluid and commanding. He rose to his full height, eyes blazing, hands open and calm. "Step back," he said. His voice carried the weight of authority, not just command. The settlers hesitated, unsure of whether they faced a man or a force of nature. Mariah stood behind him, heart racing, unsure whether to feel fear or awe. Taha did not strike, did not threaten, yet the power in his presence made the settlers lower their weapons. Without a word, he motioned toward the brush. "Leave," he said. And one by one, they retreated, muttering in confusion and fear. Thomas, pale and shaken, looked at Taha with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You could have killed them. Why didn't you?" Taha's gaze shifted to Mariah. "Because I do not kill without need," he said, "and because I do not seek to terrify you with force. You will learn the difference between danger and power, Mariah, if you survive long enough." Mariah swallowed hard. "I don't want to be afraid of you," she admitted. "You will not be," Taha replied simply. "Not if you learn to trust yourself. Not if you learn to recognize your own strength." The sun climbed higher, casting a harsh, golden light over the mesquite grove. Mariah realized that she had never felt so alive, so alert, so present. Every sound, the whisper of wind through the leaves, the faint rustle of distant wildlife, the soft stamping of Starfire's hooves felt amplified, urgent. She was aware of danger, yes, but also of possibility. Thomas sat silently on his horse, a man caught between fear, jealousy, and helplessness. He knew he could not understand what drew Mariah to Taha, and the realization gnawed at him like a persistent ache. Mariah finally turned to Taha, her voice firm. Tell me everything you can. About the bond, about why you saved me, about why you're here." Taha's gaze softened ever so slightly, but his tone remained grave. "Some things cannot be told in words alone. You will see in time, through choices and actions, what it means. And when the time comes, you will decide for yourself." A sudden gust of wind swept through the grove, rustling the mesquite leaves like whispered warnings. Mariah felt the pull again, the invisible thread linking her fate to Taha's. It was dangerous, exhilarating, and terrifying. "I don't understand it yet," she admitted. "But I want to." Taha nodded, a rare, small smile touching his lips. "Then you will. And when you do, you will know the weight of freedom and the price it demands." For hours, they sat near the fire in silence, the only sound the whispering wind, Starfire's occasional snort, and the faint crackle of embers. Mariah realized she was learning something profound, not just about Taha, but about herself. Strength, courage, and freedom were not granted. They were earned, and often at great cost. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Taha finally rose. "It is time," he said, voice low. "We move before others find this place. The desert is not forgiving to those who linger too long." Mariah nodded, mounting Starfire with deliberate care. Thomas followed reluctantly, his eyes wary. Taha led the way, the wind tugging at his long black hair and coat, a dark silhouette against the dying light. As they rode, Mariah felt a mixture of fear, curiosity, and anticipation. She did not know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing. The bond Taha had spoken of was real. It was here, weaving through the desert air, connecting them in ways she could not yet understand, and deep inside, a part of her brave, restless, untamed, was ready to follow it wherever it led. The night settled over the mesquite, the desert alive with whispered secrets. Mariah Jensen, 30 years old, strong and observant, realized that her life was no longer her own, but perhaps, for the first time, she had a choice in shaping it. Somewhere beyond the shadows, Taha rode beside her, not a threat. Not a lover, not a savior, but a guide. And she would learn to trust him, to navigate the dangers of the desert, and to face the truths that had been waiting beneath the mesquite for far too long. The wind tore across Red Mesa like a living thing, rattling loose stones and bending the scrubby desert grass in waves. Dark storm clouds churned on the horizon, and the first distant rumbles of thunder rolled over the plateau. Mariah Jensen tightened her grip on Starfire's reins, her green eyes scanning the vast expanse of the mesa. She could see the canyon drop sharply below, a sheer wall of rock and sand that made the ground beneath her feel fragile. She had followed Taha here, guided by instinct, by an unspoken pull that had begun the moment he had whispered her name across the river months ago. Her heart pounded not just with fear, but with anticipation. Every step across the rocky plateau brought her closer to the answers she had sought since that morning, the reason he had entered her life, the meaning behind his words, "You are mine." Thomas rode behind her, tense and pale. He had tried to dissuade her from following Taha, but Mariah's determination was absolute. Every attempt to reason with her had failed. Thomas's protective instincts clashed with his frustration and jealousy, leaving him on edge as he navigated the rough terrain. "You don't have to do this," Thomas said finally, his voice rough with strain. "You don't have to go after him. We can leave. Forget him." Mariah shook her head, her long chestnut hair whipping across her face in the wind. "I can't, Thomas. I've tried ignoring him, but I can't. Not anymore. This isn't just about him. It's about me, about what I'm willing to risk and who I want to be." Thomas exhaled sharply, clenching his jaw. "I don't understand you sometimes," he muttered, but he did not try to stop her. He knew he could not. A sudden movement at the edge of the plateau made her freeze. There he was, Taha, standing at the precipice, silhouetted against the storm-darkened sky. His long black hair and tribal jewelry glimmered in the dying light, his muscular frame imposing and yet somehow serene. He had anticipated her arrival, and the sight of him made her chest tighten. "You came," he said softly, his voice carrying over the distance, steady and calm despite the raging wind. "I had to," Mariah replied, her voice catching. "I needed to see you. Needed to understand." Taha's eyes, black and penetrating, searched hers. "Understanding comes with choices," he said, his tone grave. "And choices come with consequences. You must decide what you are willing to pay." Thomas's voice rang out, sharp and panicked. "Mariah, don't listen to him. He's not. Thomas, stop." Mariah shouted, turning to face him. "I am not afraid of him, and I am not afraid of myself. This is my choice." Taha stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them without threat. "You have always had the strength," he said softly. "You only needed to recognize it, and now you do." Mariah's heart raced. She realized that everything, the river, the canyon ambush, the mesquite grove, had been leading to this moment. She could feel the invisible thread connecting her fate to Taha's, pulling her forward, daring her to step into the unknown. Thomas, eyes wide with disbelief and fear, took a step toward her. "You can't choose him over me," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "You're my wife." Mariah's green eyes met his, unwavering. "I am no one's possession, Thomas. Not yours, not his, not anyone's. I choose my own life." Taha extended his hand toward her, open, inviting, but never demanding. "Freedom is not given," he said. "It is taken by those brave enough to claim it. Will you claim it, Mariah?" The wind whipped her hair across her face, the first drops of rain mingling with the sweat and dust of the mesa. The storm broke overhead, lightning streaking across. the darkened sky illuminating the plateau in brilliant flashes. Mariah swallowed hard. She could hear the thunder in her chest, the roar of the storm in her mind. I will, she said, voice trembling but firm. She reached for his hand, and in that instant the world seemed to still. The storm around them raged, but the connection between them was undeniable. Thomas sank to his knees, defeated, the realization crushing him that he could not bind her heart, no matter his love or fear. I understand, he whispered, his voice breaking. I can't hold you, not if this is your choice. Mariah turned to him, compassion and resolve mingling in her gaze. I am grateful for you, Thomas. I will not forget what you have been in my life, but my path is my own now. Taha squeezed her hand gently, anchoring her in the chaos of the storm. You are stronger than you know, he said, and stronger than anyone around you can imagine. Lightning struck the canyon below, illuminating the drop and sending a shiver through both men. Mariah felt a thrill of exhilaration, a mixture of fear and freedom unlike anything she had ever known. She had chosen the unknown, chosen a life beyond obligation, beyond fear. Where do we go from here? She asked, voice soft, almost intimate, as the rain began to fall in earnest. Taha, single quotes S eyes, dark and unflinching, held hers. Forward. Always forward. Together. Thomas finally stood, watching them, the storm reflecting in his eyes. He clenched his fists once, then let them fall. Take care of her, he said quietly, almost to himself. She deserves that. Mariah's heart ached briefly, a pang of sorrow for the life she left behind, the familiarity she could not carry forward. But as Taha led her horse toward the edge of the plateau, she felt a liberation so profound it made her chest swell. The rain soaked her hair, her clothing, her skin, but it could not wash away the resolve that had taken root. They rode together. Along the mesa, the wind tearing at them, the thunder rolling beneath their hooves. The storm was not an obstacle. It was a baptism, a cleansing of fear, doubt, and hesitation. With every beat of Starfire's hooves, Mariah felt herself shedding the chains of expectation and stepping fully into the life she had chosen. Taha spoke quietly as they rode. There will be challenges ahead. This land is not forgiving, and neither are those who wish to claim what is not theirs. But together you will face them, and you will endure. Mariah nodded, a small smile breaking through the rain-slicked dirt and dust. I trust you, she said simply, and I trust myself. They reached the edge of the mesa as the first light of dawn broke through the dissipating storm, casting gold and pink across the canyon below. Mariah looked down at the valley, the rivers snaking through the desert like silver threads. For the first time, she felt truly free, not defined by obligation, fear, or money. She was the master of her fate. Taha turned to her, high soft but unwavering. The past will follow, he said, but it will not bind you. Remember that. Mariah nodded. I will. The two of them rode down the rocky trail from Red Mesa, the storm behind them, the sun rising ahead. Thomas watched from the plateau, his figure shrinking as they disappeared into the valley, leaving behind the world he had known and the woman he could not hold. Mariah felt the wind on her face, the rain still glistening on her hair, and for the first time she felt alive in a way she never had. She had chosen freedom, she had chosen Taha, and in doing so she had claimed her own destiny. The valley stretched endlessly before them, full of danger, mystery, and promise. But for the first time, Mariah knew she was not afraid. She had strength, courage, and the unspoken bond with Taha, a bond older than fear, older than choice, that would carry them both into the future. As they rode side by side, Mariah Jensen realized that her journey had just begun. The land was vast, the challenges many, but her heart was steady, her spirit unyielding, and her path Finally, her own. The $20 at the river, the ambush at Raven's Pass, the whispers beneath the mesquite all had led her here. And she knew now that life was not measured in coin or control, but in courage, choice, and the willingness to step into the unknown. Taha glanced at her, his dark eyes holding a rare softness. "You are mine in truth," he said quietly, not as a claim, but as acknowledgment of their bond. Mariah met his gaze, a smile tugging at her lips despite the storm. "Then we face the future together," she replied. Voice steady. The wind carried them forward into the sunrise, into freedom, into the life they would forge together. The desert stretched endlessly, full of secrets and possibilities, but for the first time, Mariah felt she belonged, not to Thomas, not to fear, not to obligation, but to herself, and to the man who had shown her the meaning of choice.